Perché vorrei che ti si vedesse nello schermo.
A me mi dà noia.
Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to this panel. Hello, everyone. Today we will talk about speech acts, prosody, and the analysis of spontaneous speech, spoken language. Our welcome to the audience and to our presenters. We thank everybody for joining us. My name is Lucia de Almeida Ferrari from the Federal University of Minas Gerais. I am very pleased to present this session of Abralim ao Vivo, Linguist Online, an initiative of Abralim, Associação Brasileira de Linguística, in cooperation with various international associations, amongst them the Comité Internacional Permanente de Linguistas, the Associación de Lingüística y Filología de América Latina, ALFAL, the Sociedad Argentina de Estudios Lingüísticos, the Linguistic Society of America, the Linguistics Association of Great Britain, and the Australian Linguistic Society. So today, our guests are here with us to talk on a series of talks and roundtables promoted by Abralim. And I encourage all of you to check the ones that have already happened and are available online, and the ones that will come later. We warmly thank our guests, Emanuela Cresti and Massimo Moneglia, for being here today. Emanuela Cresti was professor of Italian grammar at Università di Firenze. She founded the Lablita Research Laboratory, focused on speech linguistics resources and their use in language technologies. She has been guest professor in a number of universities and has presided the Società Internazionale di Linguistica e Filologia Italiana, where she's currently coordinating the Redire project for the development of network infrastructure for Italian teaching. She combines spontaneous Italian speech corpora and directed the national and international projects. In particular, she coordinated the Corpora project, the integrated reference corpora for spoken language, Romance spoken language. Her research focuses on linguistic acts and prosody, and she is responsible for a theoretical framework, the language into act theory, that identifies functional units of speech through prosodic features. Massimo Moneglia is Associate Professor of Linguistics and member of the PhD program in Linguistics at the Società di Università di Firenze, where he teaches general linguistics and semantic and lexicology. He has taught semantic and linguistics as a visiting professor at various universities, such as Kiev University, Helsinki University, Denis Diderot, Paris Septien, among others. His research mainly focuses on natural language semantic, language acquisition theory, corpus linguistic, and natural language technologies. In these fields, he has contributed to over 100 scientific papers. He has a vast experience with speech corpora, including spontaneous speech corpora, language acquisition corpora, and language pathology corpora. He contributed to the creation of the Lablita Lab. He has been scientific manager of the Sierra Leone project, and he is currently scientific manager of the Redire project. He is also head of the IMAGAT project for the development of a multilingual image-based ontology of actional context. So thank you all for being here. Our panel is Speech Acts, Prosody, and the Analysis of Spontaneous Spoken Corpora. Without any further ado, I'll give the floor to Professor Moneglia and Professor Cresti. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Lucia. I think now it's up to me. Is it already? It's okay? Can you see my screen? I hope so. Thank you very much. So the talk is divided in two parts. The first part by me and the second part by Emanuela. And the talk is divided indeed in 4 sessions. In the first session, let me turn. In the first session, I will deal with the pragmatic criteria for identification of the utterance in spontaneous spoken language. And then what are the criteria for internal segmentation of the utterance, and in particular, the role of one information unit that is called comment. And this is very important for the second part of the talk, That is because the comment is the unit that allow to identify speech act in spontaneous speech. In the second part, Emanuela, we will talk about the repertoire of speech act that has been developed within the language into act theory framework. And she will deal with the criteria for recovery of speech act. And in particular, she will focus on some of these that are very specific speech act that we find in the analysis, that we can identify in the analysis of spontaneous speech. So, what it is important, speech act in speech, because speech is something that do not specify very clearly what is the reference unit of what is the element for linguistic analysis that we find in speech. Because syntax is maybe not enough to identify what are the entities that we refer of utterance in spontaneous speech. In the last decade of the last century, various contribution has been done to identify in spontaneous spoken language, I mean in the flow speech, what is an utterance. There are contributions in particular by Klembe-Venist in the longer grammar, Biber and Compain, the C unit, and the idea that there are minimal clauses that can play the role of utterance is very important. In our research, we try to make clear that in the flow speech, the boundaries of speech act are not clearly identified by syntax for many reasons. One of these reasons is the existence of many clauses that do not have a structure since they are nominal. However, the role of prosody turned out very important to this end. Let's see the first example of this talk. In principle, this stretch of speech could give rise to only one syntactic structure, but this is not the case. And if you listen to the prosody of this stretch of speech, you understand clearly why.
I don't care. That was the ugliest set of shoes I ever saw in my life.
This is taken from the Santa Barbara corpus, and we can easily see that the first part of the utterance
I don't care.
Can be interpreted in isolation. It accomplishes speech act. And the second part is also independent and is a second speech act.
That was the ugliest set of shoes I ever saw in my life.
So the pronoun that it is not a conjunction here. And it's some in the second utterance is completely independent from the first. If we look to syntax, only to syntax, we would say that the stretch of speech is in some sense ambiguous on the with regard to its possible structure. But if we listen to prosody and we get the audio signal, we know that this stretch of speech is not ambiguous at all. And so in some sense, the prosodic cues allow to assign a syntactic structure to the stretch of speech and not the reverse, as in general we think. What is an utterance? What does it correspond to what we said it is a speech act? Well, the definition of Austin, the original definition of Austin is our very clear background. And it also the English tradition that go back to Quirk and more recently to Leech. The utterance is a linguistic entity that is felt. concluded and autonomous. In our specific framework, we try to, in some sense, to link this to assertion. So the idea that utterance is a speech act and it is felt concluded as autonomous. In some sense, we said it is concluded and it is autonomous because it has an illocutionary force and can be pragmatically interpreted in the world. So if the utterances, we said in our definition, is a minimal linguistic entity such that can be pragmatically interpreted in the world. In this sense, we strictly follow Austin's and speech act tradition. However, the identification of the utterance in the speech flow can be made more precise, making specific operational criteria to determine the utterance boundaries. And these criteria are prosodic. And we determined that the idea of terminal prosodic break have a crucial role in this task. Indeed, also in the very old tradition of study of prosody, the idea that the utterance have boundaries that can be perceived with the quality of being terminal is something that go back to Karszewski and has been repeated many times in the traditional study, very old traditional study in particular. We said that each sequence that end with the terminal break corresponds to an utterance defined in speech term. So in some sense, we can verify, and this is something that we verified across many different contexts and languages and corpora, that is a very strong criterion to identify utterance in the flow of speech. And the principle is something that we are going to verify in this talk immediately. This is a stretch of speech taken from the Santa Barbara corpus.
What's Hearts?
Hearts, the card game.
Oh yeah? Put it up there. Neat. Wait, play Norris. I've never played Hearts before.
So for instance, here I have a set of a nominal utterance.
Neat. Wait.
Sorry.
Play Norris.
So in this case, is the distinction between one need and wait is done because we perceive that there is a break here. And this isolate the nominal entity and allow us to not to read it in continuity. So this can be done, for instance, in Portuguese.
Rogério, você sabe aqui como é que tem que fazer esse muro aqui, né? Por que você não está trabalhando com linha aqui, ó? Hein?
Eu vou suspender um pouquinho e vou pegar ali e vou colocar por cima.
Ah, porque senão, aqui, ó. Aí, por exemplo.
So, for instance, in this very famous dialogue of the Choral Bresis corpus, we repeat the principle that terminated sequence correspond to speech chat.
Rogério. Ah, porque senão.
Ok, so.
C'est-à-dire qu'il y a des périodes où c'est très difficile. Surtout quand on doit s'occuper d'obsèques, je dirais, d'enfants, de jeunes, où là ça devient très très pénible. Mais sinon, gêner, c'est pas le mot, non.
Each utterance corresponds to a speech act. It's interesting to look to this French example. Il y a des périodes où c'est très difficile, surtout quand on doit s'occuper de ces, je dirais, d'enfants de jeunes. In principle, it could be a sentence, but it is not a sentence because, again, it is the prosody that tell us that this is an utterance.
C'est-à-dire qu'il y a des périodes où c'est très difficile.
It is concluded by a terminal break, and this is the subsequent.
Surtout quand on doit s'occuper d'obsèques, je dirais, d'enfants, de jeunes.
And so on. So
Non.
we can do it also in Italian. This is our language. In principle, I'll go through it very, very quickly. But I want to show that the idea that each terminated sequence it's a separated utterance. It is not a function of our individuation of the specific speech act that has been accomplished. The speech act assignment, it's a categorization issue, while the definition of the utterance boundaries is devoted to perception. So we can perceive what is concluded, and only afterward we can say, well, this is, for instance, an invite.
Buoni, calmi. Tanti compagni dicono, allora dovevamo fare la rivoluzione. Non facevi niente, perché gli americani con gli inglesi stavano proprio in attesa di quello, perché ancora c'erano in Italia. Ci stanno tuttora.
I hope you can hear, because
Dunque,
sometimes the sound it is not very strong enough. Anyway, in general, our framework foresee that the segmentation of the speech flow is done through identification of terminal boundaries. The identification of terminal boundaries correspond to the performance of the utterance. In some sense, our theoretical framework can be compared with the traditional idea of chafe, one idea of time in speech. In our framework, this is not false. It is true in some sense, but we must also consider that in the flow speech, we do one elocutionary act at a time. This is the main frame for the segmentation of speech into acts. So the minimal linguistic entity for grammatical, semantic, and syntactic interpretation. So what determines the utterance boundaries? What determines prosodic break? And to which extent our perception can be trustable for scientific analysis? A lot of scholars challenged during the years this idea and find that to trust perception in some sense is something that lead linguistic analysis to undeterminacy. Utterance boundaries and prosodic boundaries in general has been dealt with in a lot of studies, and this list is the list of prosodic features that in general are considered responsible for the onset of one boundary or prosodic boundaries. The main are read here: pause, final lengthening, and the main one is F0 reset, sudden change of intensity, and other. So this criterion based on this perception, however, need very, very little training, while on the contrary, the analysis of F0 track is extremely complex and in some sense the analysis don't lead to clear identification without perception. We need perception in order to distinguish what are the boundaries that they have relevance from those that don't have relevance. So this is this quote is classic to this end. We need perception to understand, to distinguish perceptual break that have some reason, some linguistic reason. And these, I would like to cite the work by Hart and colleagues from the IPO school in the 90s and in the late 80s that very nicely underlined that those prosodic movements that are intentionally performed are highly relevant to perception. So that the correlation between prosodic movement and perception is in some sense at the base of linguistic analysis, also in phonetics. Here we have our first F0 track in this talk. We talk about prosody, but this is how prosody is represented in ordinary speech program, like WinPitch, that is our favorite. And here you see in red the F0 track, in green you have the intensity, and then the wave in blue. And here you say,
Ah, it's the card game.
so you see that you may have some specific, even in this case, a pretty big more than 200 millisecond pause in between hearts and is the card game. And here you have also a big F0 reset, but this F0 reset don't have any perceptual relevance, while on the contrary, this F0 reset that is roughly of the same length have strong perceptual relevance. So in general, what we do in the analysis of spontaneous speech data, we mark the prosodic break that is conveyed by our perception, and then we verify if the F0 tract gives evidence to this perceptual evidence. So in some sense, the spoken corpora that we are analyzing through this device, through this correlation, has been also verified from a formal point of view. It's a bunch of corpora that has been treated using both terminal and non-terminal prosodic break, depending on the different approach in the last 20 years and even 30 years, starting from the Santa Barbara corpus. And in particular, we are dealing with the C-oral tradition that started from our Labrita corpus of spoken Italian and has been extended to a collection of Romance languages in the choral Rom resource, and then the choral Brazil by Tommaso Raso, Eliana Melogs, and colleagues has been developed, and the cordial for Spanish. And there are also, I would like to mention other resources that are available, like the information patterning database, where also American English of the Santa Barbara corpus has been treated following the language to art theory approach. In this slide, you have the first release, the beta version of our new release of the Lablita corpus that you can find if you are interested at the above internet address. It's still covered, so if you want to look to it, just copy the address. And the Lablita corpus is now presented through the Orfeo interface that has been developed for French Corpora and has been given to us for presenting the release of our Corpora. Anyway, for what regard the reliability of the perceptual criteria for segmentation into utterance, a lot of validation has been done in the years. Here you have some of this validation for the Dutch corpus, the choral Ron corpus, the choral Bresic corpus. In general, I can say that we record a very nice inter-rater agreement, cap over 80% on the detection of terminal break, and in almost all collection of choral Ron corpora, also French, that is the worst one, or the worst result, approximate the threshold of 8. And in recent year, the idea of finding automatically terminal break and non-terminal break has been very developed in Brazil by Tommaso Raso and Plinio Barbosa in Campinas. They are, in particular Plinio, they are trying to have a software that detect automatically break. And I also like to mention this this number of Rivista de Studio del Linguagem, where this the various approaches to automatic segmentation of spontaneous speech has been faced by various scholars, and the main problems has been also considered. This is a very important issue of this magazine. And but I would like to conclude this this report on the different analysis of inter-rater agreement, citing a book that is going to appear. It has not yet appeared, and it is here. And in this, in the research, that is the base of this group, of this book, different approaches has been used for the annotation of the same set of spoken text. You see here the Chafe approach that has been demonstrated in a recent talk in Abralin by Maria Mitun, and then our approach, Izre'el approach, and then the approach by Kibrik and colleagues, Mariuama and Philippe Martin itself. And what happened? Despite the different criteria that has been used and different definition in these main approaches to spontaneous speech, we find Alessandro Panunzi in the round table presented here at the Abralina Vivo, presented the result of the agreement on the detection of breaks. And a very interesting result is that in almost 85% of cases, at least on total, we have almost total agreement on terminal break. And only in a few cases we have that where people other people mark a terminal break, the other mark a non-terminal break. But in no case, when someone find a terminal break, other don't find, anybody find any break. So this is a very important result because it's cross-theoretical. So we saw that the perception is so strong that independently of the theory applied, there is a strong agreement on the presence of break, in particular when the break is considered terminal, at least by someone. And so this is the result support the idea that the perception of terminal break is strong and shared, and so is trustable for spontaneous speech analysis. Indeed, I have one other thing to say. It's in a recent research that we have done that we also corroborate this idea with a correlation between prosody and gesture. And we saw that in gesture, we never do gesture phrase that is that cross terminal break. So all the time we have a gesture is in some sense related to a speech act or to part of a speech act. Here you have an example, a very classic example of two utterances, each one with his own gesture. Oops.
Possono funzionare entrambi, sono straordinari entrambi.
So it is, the gesture is concluded just a little bit before the end of the series of speech chat. So we have a big correlation between the idea of prosodic break, utterance, and gesture. That is, our body, in some sense, react all together, both with its movement and speech to the activities performed during the speech flow. So, second part of my part is what happened with the segmentation of the utterance, because the utterance is not only, it is not done but only one prosodic unit, but can be segmented into different prosodic units. And the different prosodic units are, in our approach, as more in general, also in Chafe approach, corresponding to information unit. And the utterance is divided into prosodic unit, and from one prosodic unit and the other, we can find out a break that is not terminal. It is perceived and non-terminal. So we perceive a break, but the break is not, don't have the feature terminal break. In our approach, this is not limited to the idea that every prosodic unit ending with a non-terminal break corresponds to an idea. But this also leads to the structure of the utterance into parts. And the structure of the utterance is divided into information units that are part of an information pattern. But the main principle of the structuring, the internal structuring of the utterance in our approach is called the comment principle. The comment principle says something that is very important for the speech check and analysis. Because the idea is that if an utterance is compound by more than one prosodic units, then the information unit corresponding to one of them is the only one that is necessary and sufficient to express the locutionary cue. that is to express how the utterance should be interpreted. In some sense, we say that the illocutionary information is not spread through the structure of the utterance, but is concentrated in one prosodically defined part of this utterance. This is a nice and simple way to see this. For instance, let's look to this example taken from the Santa Barbara corpus.
Consists of two things.
I hope you will hear. Consists of two things, is what he said. And if I listen to this, I say, hey, this is something that in principle can be interpreted. If somebody asks me in what it consists, and I can answer, it consists of two things.
Consists of two things.
But this is not the utterance. The whole utterance is longer than this one.
If I can say it consists of two things.
And even longer.
My success in life, if I can say it, consists of two things.
So the utterance, if the utterance is divided into information unit corresponding each one to prosodic unit, one of them convey the locutionary information and in principle could be autonomous and may accomplish a speechet. Look, I didn't tell you what should be the specific speechet performed in this case, but I'm sure that this is autonomous and can be interpreted.
Consists of two things.
Let's say again.
17 years and 10 months.
How long it take? 70 years and 10 months. That could be an answer. Can be accepted an autonomous utterance, but it is not the real one.
I stayed in the U.S. Navy 17 years and 10 months.
This is the real utterance. So look that here you have a sentence in the first part of the utterance, and the illocutionary cue are in the second part of the utterance. So the core of this utterance is the information given here, even if syntax says that the main sentence is in the first part that do not bear the illocutionary cue. So the core of the utterance is not selected according to syntactic principle, but according to prosodic and pragmatic principles. Here you have a Brazilian Portuguese example.
O povo fica na sala.
Again, o povo fica na sala. Can be interpreted. What happened? O povo fica na sala.
Tradição lá, o povo fica na sala. Chegou lá, tradição lá, o povo fica na sala. Aí chegou lá, tradição lá, o povo fica na sala.
Well, this can happen in the case where the comment is a sentence, but also...
Tudo pobrezinho.
Say it again.
Tudo pobrezinho.
Tudo pobrezinho.
Da Fafica, tudo pobrezinho. Do lado da mãe da Fafica, tudo pobrezinho.
So, again in Italian.
Tutto pronto? Di là, tutto pronto? Di là gli acidi, tutto pronto?
So,
tutto pronto?
Again, in this case, tutto pronto is complete from the point of view of his performance has been checked, but is only the part of this utterance.
Di là gli acidi, tutto pronto?
So, the comment principle. The information unit of comment is autonomous, is necessary, is sufficient to perform an utterance. It accomplishes the illocution of the entire utterance. And so, for this reason, it is the core. The core of the utterance, what is in other approaches called the noyau of the utterance, or what is the focus of the utterance, he in the language into act theory find a pragmatic definition that is the core of the utterance, is the illocutionary part of it. But of course, the utterance, as we saw, it is not compound only by a comment unit. We have complex utterance, and we have different types of information unit, each one corresponding to one specific prosodic unit. We have here a table of correspondence that what is in heart theory, in the hypo perspective, consider a root element correspond to what in the utterance is correspond. It is from a pragmatic point of view, a comment unit. And then we have different types of formally defined prosodic units that should correspond to different type of information unit. All these information units strictly correspond to one prosodic unit. Now we are, I very briefly go through the main pattern, that is the topic comment pattern, that is the more important, and I think everybody know that the utterance can be structured in a topic comment. What we could have done, considering systematically considering the internal structure of spoken corpora, we could find out roughly what is the percent of utterances that do present this structure. For instance, languages may have different percentage. According to other of our studies, you see here the study on Brazilian Portuguese and American English done in Belo Horizonte by Tommaso Raso and his colleagues, Emanuela Mitman, Cavalcante, and there is a 10% less. So it's a big difference that we find out from language to language with respect to the topic comment structure. What is important in topic comment structure to be highlighted? So it is important the fact that the topic have also a strong prosodic prominence. It can guest a lot of different types of phrases, but it can never be interpreted. So the locutionary cue never belong to the topic unit, even it is so prominent from a prosodic point of view. Have a look to this.
Very inexpensive. Most of them, very inexpensive.
Most of them, very inexpensive. So the comment is here.
Very inexpensive.
And this is much more prominent.
Most of them.
But can't be interpreted.
Most of them.
So here you have another example that we already saw, and we can see it in detail.
17 years and 10 months. I stayed in the U.S. Navy 17 years and 10 months.
The sentence is in topic. It can't be interpreted, and the comment.
I stayed in the U.S. Navy.
Can't be interpreted. We have different of this. Let's meet this Brazilian one. Oh. Oh. Some problem here.
Aí batalha.
This is the comment.
Batalha.
This is cannot be interpreted. You see here the non-terminal break recorded, and the different type of this is the French, this is another Italian. So it's interesting to see that, for instance, the structure of spoken language allow us to consider not only the content, the topic, but even other information unit. Let me end up my part giving an example of the appendix unit that is interesting for two reasons. First of all, the existence of the appendix unit, somebody call it anti-topic, they allow us to see that the comment unit, that is the part that have a locutionary cue, do not have a necessary relation of contiguity. It is not necessarily continuous with the terminal break, but you can have an utterance even if it has a terminal break separate from the comment.
Mia cognata assomiglia.
Here is an old woman looking to pictures and look to somebody and say,
assomiglia.
This can be interpreted. This is the comment. And here you have the predicate. You cannot hear it. So this is the appendix unit. It is not necessary. It is something that integrates the comment, but all the information is inside the comment. And here you say it is not in continuity, contiguous to the terminal break, but is also the nominal part divided from the predicative part. And so you have also a Brazilian example here. Oh.
Corpos de Urano que tem aí.
This is the comment. This is the predicative part aside the terminal break. So all this give us a research strategy for the study of information structure in locutionary form, starting from spontaneous speech data. And the strategy will be find a comment in the stretch of speech and interpret the locutionary value of the utterance faced to the specific unit of content. Look, the assignment of a locutionary tag to the comment is a second level analysis. It is not a matter of individuation, it's a matter of interpretation. And this, the second talk, I will pass to Emanuela, the PowerPoint.
So I'm going to present 2 points: the prosodic identification of illocutionary types and their repertory, and the fine-grained analysis of some specific illocutionary type. So Massimo has always explained to you that if the definition of utterance limit is a matter of direct perception, the assignment of a specific illocutionary value to an utterance is a categorization issue involving our knowledge of linguistic values. The correlation between utterance, prosodic identification, and their pragmatic accomplishment has been verified on the spoken corpora of the C-oral family. The study of the correlation between prosodic form and illocutionary value lead to discover illocutionary types not identified in current taxonomies. The lax illocutionary repertory indeed is not grounded on lexical, logic, and syntactic criteria, as for instance, the great tradition of Searle, Sbizar, Turner, and also more recent research by Weissel. The detection of illocutionary types in corpus and their modalization have been carried out through experimental research and test in our lab, Lablita. The illocutionary values has been assigned in research specifically considering the prosodic performance of utterance, and this has not been done in the other taxonomy. So the added value of our research is that we can isolate within the utterance exactly the part bearing the pragmatic information, as Massimo told you, the comment unit. And this is a lucky situation because usually there is a problem to identify what is the pragmatic accomplishment of an utterance, because an utterance can be also very long and complex, but actually only the comment is the part dedicated to this function. And the comment is performed through a specific prosodic unit of the root type according to the IPO terminology. And the root type presents some interesting formal variants. And these are conventional models of root prosodic unit which can be sufficient to distinguish illocutionary types conveying specific pragmatic forces. And what I'm saying can be easily verified in a situation where we get a same lexical word in a same context, and anyway, we can recognize the accomplishment of different illocutionary types. Let's see this example that for us is a classic example. And the situation is a husband and a wife in bed, and they are joking, but a little bit also arguing. Let's
do what you want with the time you have. Learn, give, whatever.
Love.
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 So,
love.
We can appreciate that the first usage of the word love accomplish what we call a proposal by the wife. The second usage of the word love accomplish, on the contrary, an ironic illocution, which has a negative meaning. The third usage of the word love is a conclusion, and the wife pretends not to have understood the negative answer, ironic answer of her husband, but she ends laughing. So at the end,
love.
She has understood. But so we can see the different form, the F0 movement of the proposal, of the ironic answer, and the conclusion. Now we can, let's see another example for Brazilian text, and it is a dialogue between housekeepers warning to be careful with respect to very precious glasses.
Ok, copos de Urano que tem aí.
Copos de quê?
Urano.
Urano?
É. Urano.
And clearly not. There is a mistake, a misunderstanding, because the first housekeeper says the term Urano, and she wants to mean Murano, which is a very famous kind of glass from Venice, but she says Urano, who is the Greek gold of the sky, but the other is not interested and she cannot recognize this mistake. So in the first usage of the word Urano, the first housekeeper make an answer to the question done by the second housekeeper. Then the second housekeeper proceed making a request of confirmation.
Urano?
Because she don't understand what is this Urano. Then the first housekeeper conclude making a conclusion and then a confirmation.
Urano.
So we have the same word which is repeated 4 times, every time with a different accomplishment of a different speech act. Let's see also an Italian example. Here there is a sister who asks the brother for a picture in his collection. And so the brother answer to her to choose between these 2 pictures. And then he repeats between these 2 pictures, and then the sister make a request to confirmation.
Scegli tra questi due. Tra questi due.
Tra
questi due? Sì.
Detail, we can compare.
Due.
We can compare the difference of this, the form of the prosodic form of these 2 words, due, confirmation, and due, the request of confirmation. Let's see also a Spanish example. Here there is a father and his daughter who are arguing because she has not passed the examination. At the end, she must agree with the father. And so she says, it's okay. And the father says, and it is the same word, vale, but the first time is what we call a self-conclusion. And in the case of the father, the same word, vale, is a request of agreement.
Vale.
Here there is during the visit to an old lady and her pet rabbit. What is more interesting that the old lady say to her friend, asked the friend to look for her beloved pet rabbit, and so she said. And then is exactly the same word, regard, look, but the first time she's doing an order to her friends, and the second time she's doing a deixis of a still object because the pet rabbit was stopping himself. Okay, and you can see the different if-zero profile of these different speech act. Vai avanti. So I have been telling a lot of name tags of speech act like conclusion, answer, ascertainment, confirmation, self-conclusion, proposal, request of confirmation, of attention, order, deixis of still object, irony. So, phase 2 pragmatic concept, we see that prosodic form unnecessary for their illocutionary interpretation. And so, in our lab, we led to discover a working repertory of about 90 locutionary types that was derived from the empirical observation of a pragmatic set of features. Yes, we didn't invent anything. We have been retracing to user-based lines of research that consider the language as a complex adaptive system. But in addition, our frame lacked consider the correlation between the comment, so exactly this part of the utterance, and the prosodic identification of a comment and its pragmatic accomplishment. And what are more or less the pragmatic features that we have been considering? We call it with the general term pragmatic, but they regard communication. What is the state of the channel of a communication, open or closed? If there is a shared attentional horizon, what is the focus of the utterance? What are the most important features of the context? If the reference object is far, is near, is still, is in movement? What is the proxemics between speaker and addressee? Gesticulation, as such as Massimo showed to you, gaze. What is the role of the speaker? What is the condition of the addressee? And if the speaker is doing something when he is speaking, is he working? Is he reading? What is the intentional value of the action? What is the commitment of the speaker on the content through? What is the affective involvement of the speaker toward the addressee? What is the expected effects in the situation by the addressee? What is the time of the fulfillment of the speech act? Who is the beneficiary of the act? And clearly, there is also a linguistic counterpart of the speech act, the locutive content that, for instance, is necessary when, for instance, the speech act is a ritual act. So if I baptize somebody, I must have just a formula. Or if I say good morning, bye-bye, there is some lexical necessary formula. But it's interesting also the voice and phonetic performance, and clearly what is the prosodic performance. So we must face what we can call the categorization issue, because doing this kind of empirical research, we got really a huge amount of data. And we need to organize this data. For instance, the most important, I think, recent research on illocutionary type categorization that done by Biber recently in 2018, he indicates 120 illocutionary type, but they are ordered in an alphabetical order. And it's very hard then to use this kind of taxonomy. So our research was to find a criteria to organize this amount of empirical data. And our frame centers around the speaker's linguistic interaction with the addressee from the perspective of the speaker performing the speech act, what is called in literature a speaker-centered model. And I must underline that the most part of model of the analysis of speech are mostly not speaker-centered, but speaker-addressee-centered. So generally is more usually consider what is the relation between speaker and addressee. But we center on the speaker who is the active subject of the action of the speech act. And this because LAT takes into consideration the deeply rooted foundation of speech, which originates in mental representation and the affective relationship with the addressee. And this according an Italian tradition who was founded by the philosopher and psychiatrist Fagioli in recent years. So we think that the trigger of speech activity is the affect the speaker intentionally directs toward the addressee. The affect toward the addressee activates an allocutionary conventionally action schema. So on this base, we were able to identify 5 illocutionary classes based on affect: refusal, assertion, direction, expression, ritual. Maybe I cannot deepen this definition, and they are similar but only partial with what is the classification made by Searle, but the the basic difference is that it is the affection moving the speaker which is the feature, the character, the aspect defining the class. But maybe we can give a look to what is the lacked repertory of illocutionary types. I was saying that we find more or less 90 illocutionary types. Here, these are not recorded 90 illocutionary types, but maybe the most important. And you can see that on the left in the yellow part, there is also another kind of organization. For instance, assertion, and on the left we see weak and a set of illocutionary type, self-conclusion, ongoing, and under, strong, and answer, ascertainment, and direction we can see on the left: appearance, involvement, change of attention, and so on. So I can say that illocutionary types actually are grouped into subclasses. So illocutionary subclasses sharing pragmatic features. And for instance, for what regard the affective class of direction, we individuate 6 subclasses, which depend on the type of the request that the speaker does toward the addressee. For example, there are typical speech acts for calling the addressee. If the addressee is visible, is far, is still, is near. There are requests aimed at the change of the attention of the addressee. And clearly there are requests for the behavior of the addressee, for the linguistic behavior of the addressee, and so on. Maybe said that if somebody is interested in this classification, I can answer after my presentation. Then I pass very rapidly to the last part, fine-grained classification within the illocutionary assertive class. And we have done, we carried out the research on the base of a corpus sampling corresponding to more or less 3,600 utterances with a significant diaphasic variation. And we choose apposta,
on purpose.
We choose on purpose utterances with a a topic comment utterance, because we know that if in utterance there is a topic, this is like a kind of symptom that utterances very probably is an assertive utterance. And so we obtain on this on our corpus of 532 utterances this percentage. Nearly 80% of these utterances are assertive, and for the rest 12-13% are expressive, and only 9% are directive. And this is interesting because we know, after a previous research made on a corpus that is more or less of the same size, that there was only 55% of utterance which was assertive. But so the choice that we have done to take only topic comment utterance has been confirmed by this percentage. I have also said that within our repertory, the assertive class is organized in two subclasses that we call weak and strong, and these depend on the degree of relevance of the semantic content, the degree of speaker commitment to the content's truth, the degree of speaker involvement toward the addressee. So if we consider also these subset, we can see that in our corpus, nearly 60% are strong illocutionary type, and the rest, 40%, are weak illocutionary type. And I want to stress that this research is something really new, because usually the assertive class is considered like an entire class, even if there is no internal distinction, no internal diversification, because very often assertive class is compared with the syntactic form of declarative sentence. But doing an empirical research on speech, we can discover that, on the contrary, assertive class reports, comprehends a lot of diversification inside it. So, for instance, in the weak assertion illocutionary subclass, we have identified at least 6 more important illocutionary types: neutral assertion, self-conclusion, assertion taken for granted, ongoing comment, confirmation, and literal citation. We will see some example of the 3 first illocutionary type. What we call a neutral assertion? A neutral assertion can be considered the basic assertive illocutionary type, which is performed during a talk with the open channel and a shared attentional horizon. It conveys new concepts on whose truth the speaker is committed. But these new concepts are always what I can say everyday contents, not so relevant, so low relevant of the content, and also the commitment on their truth is basic. And there is a speaker situation on a par with the listener, with a frequent exchange of roles. So there is no specific role in this spoken exchange. And attention and acceptance of the asserted content are expected by the listener. So there is also a low involvement of the speaker. Let's see an example.
The day before yesterday, I did ice cream,
This
right?
is a very common utterances, and it is composed, as Massimo, I think, has already shown to you, by a topic,
I did
comment,
ice cream.
and an
I did
appendix.
ice cream.
And the core part is, and
Ice
this
cream.
part is the part conveying what we call the neutral assertion. Let's see, and we
Ice
can
cream.
describe these, the form of, the prosodic form of this prosodic unit, like a rising, falling F0 profile with a medium degree of higher. Let's see also an Italian argument, and this is this situation is a woman who is telling about a weekend. So I used to eat pasta, but he ravioli, then I took the ravioli too. If I, this is, I took the ravioli. This is a assertion, and the argument clearly is not relevant. Let's see a Brazilian argument. Two friends chatting at home, and one friend is wondering about certain Dr. Joao said about lymphatic drainage.
O que o Dr. João falou da drenagem linfática?
Falou nada.
And the answer is not because the doctor said nothing. So also the answer is falou nada.
Falou nada.
And also this can be considered a neutral assertion, and you can compare the similarity of the prosodic form of these three. So now I will pass very rapidly through what are the criteria, principle to modalize the prosodic root unit. First of all, the root unit can be simple, that is compound only by the prosodic nucleus, or can be composed by a preparation and a tail after the prosodic nucleus, or it can be discontinuous, and the prosodic nucleus is characterized by some important prosodic parameter: F0 movement, length, intensity, speed rate, timing with the tonic syllable, phonetic accuracy. The F0 movement can be described as rising, falling, flat, but we consider also, and this is difference with respect, for instance, with the auto-segmental model, that we consider also the level of the starting of the movement and the level of the end, of the top of the movement. And moreover, we consider if the movement is rapid, is gradual, is slow, if the movement is short or long. So this putting all together these parameter, we can arrive to sketch, to draw what is a prosodic profile. So, for instance, for neutral assertion, we can say that the root prosodic unit can be composed of a preparation and a tail, that also its nucleus is compound, and is compound of a rising movement and a lowing falling movement, but these are not very high range. There is a strong intensity, there is a middle speed rate, and it is done with a clear voice, as you have experienced. Now, let's see what is a self-conclusion. Self-conclusion. Self-conclusion can be considered within a specific activity which is done by the speaker. A speaker can quite often direct toward himself a speech act. For instance, everybody can recognize what is a self-questioning. But we discovered that this specific kind of activity, self-conclusion, and I've never been before in the literature mentioned this kind of activity. When can it happen? Even if the speaker share a situation or even a talk with the addressee, at the end of an experiment on argumentation on a mental process, he seems suddenly estranging from the flow of the exchange. And so he is producing a semantic content of a relative relevance. And the speaker pretends to hang up the communication and changes the shared attentional horizon. And this is really the lowest involvement toward the addressee, because it doesn't really close the communication, but he pretends to hang up the communication. And without looking at the addressee in a low voice, he tells something, not caring if the latter can hear clearly, as if he were speaking for himself only, although in reality, his assertion is functional for the ongoing of the dialogue. Here we have what is telling sad memories of grandmother life from the Santa Barbara corpus.
The things I know most about life and death come from my grandmother, and having gone through all that with her.
And if we listen to the...
Having gone through all that with her.
This very sad conclusion is said only like an internal conclusion, so what we call self-conclusion. Let's see an Italian example, very different. Here there is the owner of a roof. He is on the roof with some worker and plumbers that are proposing to renovate completely the roof, and he disagrees with these workers, and so turning his back to the workers, he says this.
Là solo le gronde, le tegole 9 sì, mi fa mettere a fare lavoro,
I can see myself doing this type of work.
It's a negative conclusion.
So it's a negative conclusion, and he says it turning his back to the worker. And so this is a self-conclusion. This is another Italian example. Here is a poker player who is losing, and so just looking for an excuse, he says,
Ciò fu così peggiorare. Ciò fu così peggiorare.
just to exclude he is not very clever. Let's see a Brazilian example.
Não sei, Kátia. Que às vezes a gente sente uma dor numa hora. Depois anda, caminha, esquece da dor, não sente mais a dor. Não sabe.
So this is a conclusion, a gente não sabe, which is a very deep and general conclusion, which is said for the speaker self.
Não sabe.
Okay. So we can describe the prosodic root profile as a root, compound root with a possible preparation, but not with a tail. And the nucleus, unlikely the previous nucleus, is a simple and spread. That is, it's only a falling contour starting a median and reaching a very low level. There is done with a low intensity, with the middle low speed rate, and very often with a whispered voice. Let's go to the assertion taken for granted. Assertion taken for granted occurs within a talk with an open channel, a shared attentional horizon, unlikely the previous self-conclusion. The speaker reports information that for various reasons can be considered already known or at least expected by the addressee. So there is low relevance of the semantic content and low commitment. The speaker don't think to offer improvement of knowledge to the addressee, presupposing also his agreement, and he's waiting for a simple acceptance of his representation. So there is also a low investment. Allora, we can just show an Italian example. Here is telling about a chat between young girls.
Sono andata con dei miei amici, eravamo in 7, si è preso 2 macchine.
The first part, I went with some friends, but this is really attended, expected content. And
sono andata con dei miei amici.
Non so più, rising movement. We can, maybe we have no time, but we can see a comparable example with an American speaker.
But then Dini wanted Amelia to see Mom's house, so they go barging in unarmed. So Mom felt obligated to ask those 2 idiots to lunch. 2 idiots to lunch.
Then this is a Brazilian example. Fammi soprattutto la parte finale.
Eu vou suspender um pouquinho aqui, vou pegar ali e vou colocar por cima. E vou pegar ali e vou...
So, this is also
Votre père était riche.
French example, and how can we sketch the assertion taken for granted? The prosodic form, the root prosodic form is a compound entity, and there can be a preparation, not a tail. Also, the nucleus is a compound entity and is made by a platform, a flat movement, and a final rising movement. The speed rate of the platform is rather rapid. The rising movement can vary widely and occurs on the lengthened tonic syllable, but it goes increasing also on the post-tonic syllable. So we can just have a look and comparison between these 3 illocutionary types, which have been distinguished for their pragmatic aspect, and also their prosodic root performance are clearly distinguishable.
Ice cream.
I haven't gone through all that.
Two idiots to lunch.
So I think that I ended my time, and so I won't just...
Riche, c'est un grand moment.
Então,
Ice cream.
I haven't gone through all
Two
that.
idiots to lunch.
So what I can say, some conclusions, the assertive class is not a single indistinct entity. It can be divided into subclasses, weak and strong, for the characters of semantic relevance, commitment of contents through affective involvement toward the addressee. A set of elocutionary types belong to each subclass. Each elocutionary type is defined by specific pragmatic feature and necessarily identified through a dedicated prosodic form. The assertive subclasses have not an overall prosodic root typology. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Cresti and Professor Moneglia. Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation. It was very interesting hearing directly from you the presentation of your studies. I'll start now with some of the questions from our audience. There are two main kind of questions, one more generic and the other one about the elocution types. Well, I will ask you the first question. Could you comment on how our tradition of linguistics just a minute. Could you comment on how our tradition of linguistic studies based strongly on the concept of sentence and the written data makes us blind to similarities between different languages? For example, the idea that English or even Italian and Portuguese only have one topic while Chinese can have multiple multiple topics, yes, here.
So we have no time to enter in detail, but for instance, we and Tommaso Raso too have done a lot of research. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. For instance, on the formal variants of the prosodic unit which realize a topic. So maybe that, but I don't know that this is the question. So we know that, for instance, there is 2 or maybe 4 prosodic form for realize, for accomplish, perform prosodically topic. But the question regarding the semantic content of the topic, or what?
Excuse me. Yes. Well, no, I think it's only about the difference of written data that we can't see the difference between languages based as we are on written data. Well, maybe we can pass to other questions. Okay. I have some questions about the methodology, discuss about the individuation and identification of elocutions. How do you work with this methodology? Could you discuss a little more about the methodology employed? Could you discuss a little more about the methodology employed in the individuation and identification of elocutions? Regarding the locutive pattern, I would like to ask you the parameters list, how they was formulated. What's the process behind this list of parameters, and if it is totally corpus-based work, or there are any experiments behind it?
Yes.
Voglio tornare allo share screen.
Yes.
I think we can share screen again.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Okay. And now there is a lot of research on corpus, but there is also experiment on but I described in many papers, articles, what is the working procedure to identify illocutionary type. I mean that it must be find at least 10 instances, examples that are evaluated by researcher as conveying the same illocutionary value. Then some utterances comparable with the real data are realized in the laboratory. Then there is done come si può dire una scena di film.
Okay, produced by actors.
Then produced scene produced by actors.
Make it repeatable.
And be repeated and may be integrated. Then at the end we say maybe this is the pragmatic character, and for eliciting a type of illocution, and this is a prosodic form which is adequate to express this illocution.
I would like to comment too on this question, because the fact that there might be an experimental process that try to make standard assumptions on the set of relevant parameters and make repeatable the relation between pragmatic parameters and prosodic profiles. The real part of this work is the induction from Corpora. So in the first part of this talk, you see, for instance, the difference from order and deixis. Once that you have data like this one, then you are forced to standardize the different prosodic profiles in relation to the context that you have. So is the verification of the essential role played by prosody can be verified on in experiments, but the induction starts from corpus-based data.
Okay, thank you very much. I have here another question. With regards to your directives, why do you have orders but not requests or commands? Do you consider them the same illocutionary act? I don't think so, but it's
I don't
to you.
understand.
Well,
what is comment?
Strong order. Our interest here was more to divide the illocutionary types according to main classes,
affective classes.
Main classes. For instance, the idea that when you have a mental transformation and you are asking your interlocutor to do a mental transformation instead of a physical activity, this is, I mean, something that was not clear from actual logical analysis, but the voice interpret this difference. And so in this taxonomy, we don't want to say that the taxonomy is concluded. This is a repertory. Is a repertory of something that we found relevance, and what is more relevant in this induction of concept from Corpora is specifically what appear in the different subclasses of each illocutionary class. So the answer is, this is a repertory, is not a taxonomy. I don't have any idea about the difference between order and the other.
The other, what is the word other? Comment?
No,
command.
Yes,
Command,
there is
yes.
probably a strong difference with command.
Yeah.
We love Japanese.
Okay, and in fact, about this, the other question is, when we find utterances in spontaneous speech that don't seem to convey any of the illocutionary types of the current classification, how can we be sure it's actually a new illocutionary type? How do you work with this?
Yes, still induction and interpretation. We need to find not 1, 2, 3. At least we have seen at least 10 instances that can be considered of the same type. Then we pass this to proof, to experimental proof, to people of mother tongue recognizing then or not. So this is an open repertory, because there are some illocutionary type which surely must be inserted again, and maybe that some will be lost. So
I like this question. I like this question because it is what is an interpretation? So, for instance, in our practice, we are frequently in the situation of saying, but is this act equal to the other? For instance, when you say you can see here the difference between invite and offer. So the distinction between invite and offer is something that came to our attention in relation with other colleagues, and they told us, well, hey, but you say that you are inviting this guy to take a cup of coffee, but you are just offering this kind of the type of cup of coffee. And then we will, from this kind of commentary, we start investigating whether or not there are a prosodic correspondence and differential feature between a concept like invite and a concept like offer. And this is what we do.
Okay, thank you. And well, continuing this kind of question, could you say something about acquisition of illocution in L1 acquisition?
Well, we have a set of illocutionary acts that are so basic that they appear before the onset of verbal symbols. Like, for instance, the X6 request, pointing, recall, and protest, refusal. All this set of activities are at the base of the communication, and even before the onset of the language. Then the process of language acquisition, of course, will allow a child to do something like a question, for instance.
Question is late.
That is pretty late, but we know that some basic activities are learned within the first 4 years of life, but these are the basic ones. And then other with the cultural aspect, we don't know. I mean, in our history of research, there is a special attention to the early acquisition, and in particular to the one word at time, one speech at time, and the passing from simple to complex utterance in the first 2 years of life. We don't have any specific research on the development of the speech types across language acquisition period.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't know if we have time, but I have another question here. Could you say something more about how your approach fits in an embodied vision of cognition, while Krifka's one, for example, does not?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes, I send it to you. Could you say something more about how your approach fits in an embodied vision of cognition, while Krifka one's, for example, does not?
Oh, wow.
Yes, and
I don't know if it fit with the cognition or not.
Okay.
Besides, because as you see, our approach of information structure mainly regard pragmatic activity. Krifka approach is mostly based on a scenario that is a question answering. And you know, when you call somebody, you don't have any. This is not an answer. So in the Krifka approach, I mean, Krifka and colleagues from Max Roth till Buring, I don't know, and the alternative semantics in general, they don't really study the variety of language activity in actual spoken language. So I would reverse the question: how the Krifka approach can work can face pragmatics. You know, I'm sorry.
Okay. They are sending us this message. So I think I can send you the last questions. Would you say that there are other linguistic evidences in addition to prosody in favor of the theory that there is an F, a locutionary force device, as proposed originally by Searle?
What would you say?
There are other linguistic evidences in addition to prosody in favor of the theory that there is
an F. Well, the idea that there is a speech chat without a locutionary force is pretty strange. So I think that we consider that every utterance have an illocutionary force. The utterance without illocutionary force are difficult to find. Otherwise, we don't have any way of linking the locution to the world in a certain way. So this is, I mean, the answer is pragmatic. So it is necessary.
Okay.
I mean, I don't think that you need evidence for this. There's probably it is probably a basic fact to be explained rather than evidence.
Okay. Well, excellent, Professor Cresti and Professor Moneglia. I'm really very thankful for your talk and your explanations. I think it was really very interesting, and we learned a lot about your work. I'd like to thank you again. And before we'll end, I give you the word for your final comments. I will just remind everyone to go to the Ablearning website to check the future talks on this series. And the program is incredible. There are talks on very different topics. So now I would ask you if you have any final topics or any final word you would like to say before we close our panel, please.
Well, thank you very
Thank
much,
you
Lucia.
to you, Lucia.
We're very
Bye.
happy to meet all the friends in
Yes,
Brazil
in
and,
Brazil. We
and
hope
the big success of this
yes,
Abralim ao
initiative
vivo. This initiative is
very,
very,
good,
very important.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you all.
Okay. Thank you all. Thank you very much. And we are finishing.